These are devotions for people at a social distance. Uh, Yesterday, I think I saw just in somebody's discussions, somebody speaking about the discovery of the bodies in Kamloops at the residential school site, the 215 bodies of children. They called it Canada's George Floyd moment. And that phrase kind of struck me, and I think there is probably a fair bit of truth to that. There is something that has already always been there, a long time been there in the history of our nation, and in particular racist attitudes towards Indigenous people that we've been able to sort of dismiss. And finally, something just sort of came up and very graphically exposed us to the reality and said, this is real. You can't just dismiss it anymore. And that's what this moment has been. It's not not that the evidence wasn't there, not that the truth wasn't there before. It has been documented in many ways, but this was just an event that made it that we had to face the reality, the uncomfortable reality of our own history and present as a people. And so that's a hard place to be, and it's good to see. There's been an outpouring of grief. The flags flying at half masks. I think that's a good thing. Various monuments that have been created, but there is grief, and there is also, well, what do you do about it? I thought of that this morning as I was reading in John chapter 11. Uh, and came across, of course, the one of the famous verses in the Bible, kind of famous for being the shortest. Uh, it's best known, of course, in the King James version, where it's simply Jesus wept, 2 words. I was reading in the New Revised Standard Version, which has actually 4 words. Jesus began to weep, which is probably a closer translation of the original Greek. But it is, whether it's 2 words or four, it's very clear, very to the point. Faced with the reality of death and loss, Jesus weeps together with all those who grieve. And I know that Jesus weeps for this terrible, terrible loss. Um, but of course, that's not the end of the story. And the story in John is, yes, leading to new beginnings, leading to resurrection, to new life. But there's still a few steps to come. And I was struck how just a few verses later, Jesus, still greatly disturbed, came to the tomb where Lazarus has been buried. It was a cave, a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there's a stench because he's been dead 4 days." So there's, there's the grief, and there's the very uncomfortable facing up to the reality of the death and the loss that has to come before we can begin to explore hope. So simply expressing our grief, as important that it is, there is a need to sort of dig in to the stench of the whole thing. And I think that's definitely true in our relationship with Indigenous people. Where do we go from here? Becomes a very important question. Our grief is important, but what we do about it is also very important. I was challenged just in the last couple of days. The Sunday school kids here at St. Andrew's Hespeler decided that they have a small fund of money that they are able to make use of. They decided that they would make a donation of $215 to one of our Indigenous ministries in Canada for the work that they do for healing, for hope and reconciliation and counseling, and even housing for Indigenous people in Winnipeg. And but they also put it out as a challenge. They want to challenge other people in this congregation, and honestly, they want to challenge people everywhere in the community to do what they can to give, whether it be $215, whether it be more, obviously, as is possible, to one of these ministries, one of the local ministries. We have some wonderful local ministries working with Indigenous peoples in our local area, and they are actually challenging people to support these ministries, these outreaches, these efforts for healing, reconciliation, and new beginnings. We need to face up to the stench of it all, and we need to get our hands a little bit dirty, and we need to do what we can to change the conversation. So those were my thoughts coming from John 11 this morning. And in the YouTube notes, I'll put some links to some of those organizations who are doing some really good work. Lord our God, let us move beyond grief. Let us use our grief for action, for hope, for new life, for those who can embrace it. Amen.